Hello, thank you so much for joining us for our comprehensive tinnitus care with Lenire webinar. My name is Race Fells. I am a certified tinnitus specialist located in Olympia, Washington, and I also serve as the director of audiology here at Northwest Hearing Tinnitus. A little about me: I obtained my doctorate in audiology at Lamar University in Beaumont, Texas. I studied under tinnitus researcher Dr. Vinaya Manchaya in graduate school. I've been treating patients with hearing loss and tinnitus since 2019, and I obtained my tinnitus certification back in 2024. I really enjoy working with patients who have tinnitus. I love meeting patients where they're at and providing effective, cutting-edge solutions. Just like Laura mentioned, the first part will be with me. I'll be talking about what tinnitus is, what causes it, and how we diagnose it and treat it here at Northwest using a multi-layered, evidence-based approach. And then later in the webinar, you'll get to meet Dr. Ross O'Neill, who is the founding CEO of Neuromod, which is that company that produces Lenire. We'll give you a presentation at the end. We'll have that interactive Q&A to get your questions answered about Lenire. Recently, we were mentioned as one of the top 14 Lenire providers nationwide, which we're very proud of. We really appreciate you all being here and showing interest in Lenire and in the services that we offer at Northwest Hearing Tinnitus. And without further ado, let's dive in. So what is tinnitus? Tinnitus is the perception of sound without an external source. So patients often describe it as ringing, buzzing, roaring, crickets, even bacon frying. Essentially, it is hearing a sound that is not coming from the environment around you. According to the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communication Disorders, surveys estimate that 10 to 25% of adults experience tinnitus. Some studies estimate that about 15% of adults experience longer lasting tinnitus at some point in their lives, and around 10 to 20% of people with tinnitus find it severe enough to significantly affect their quality of life. In many ways, tinnitus is similar to phantom limb syndrome in amputee patients. In phantom limb syndrome, a person may feel pain, itching, or other sensations from a limb that is no longer there. Similarly, when the ears experience hearing loss or other damage, the brain may compensate for the missing auditory input by creating the perception of sound, which we experience as tinnitus. There are many different things that can cause tinnitus. Tinnitus may be related to changes in hearing, excessive loud noise exposure, or certain ear injuries. Earwax impactions or ear infections can also cause tinnitus. Certain ear-related disorders, such as Meniere's disease or an acoustic neuroma, may also contribute to tinnitus symptoms. In some cases, tinnitus can be related to TMJ or certain ototoxic medications, and that just means medications that can cause hearing loss or tinnitus, as well as head and neck injuries. Because tinnitus can have many different underlying causes, it is important to have a comprehensive hearing evaluation or tinnitus evaluation. At Northwest Hearing Tinnitus, we can help identify potential contributing factors and determine the most appropriate treatment recommendation for you. Patients often describe their tinnitus as fluctuating in volume or having moments where their tinnitus becomes more noticeable. There are several factors that may contribute to these fluctuations, including high stress, lack of sleep are big ones, sometimes alcohol, caffeine, in some cases increased salt intake and cannabis use. For many people, tinnitus fluctuations are a normal part of the condition. As tinnitus specialists, we help patients learn how to respond to these fluctuations rather than react to them. While these fluctuations in tinnitus can feel frustrating or overwhelming, they're often temporary in nature. Through counseling, sound therapy, and individualized treatment strategies, we work with patients to make tinnitus more manageable and less disruptive to daily life. If you're struggling with tinnitus or noticing changes in your symptoms, Northwest Hearing and Tinnitus is here to provide support, education, and treatment options tailored to your needs. Our tinnitus specialists here at Northwest are doctors of audiology with advanced training in tinnitus management. We have at least one tinnitus specialist at each of our 4 locations in Seattle, Olympia, Gig Harbor, and Bremerton. Our doctors hold certifications in tinnitus management, which is why you may see the initial CHTM after their names. We require all of our tinnitus specialists to acquire the certification so that we can provide the highest quality of care to our patients. Fun fact, according to the Department of Audiology and Speech Language Pathology at East Tennessee State University, less than 10% of audiologists obtain their tinnitus certification, which is why we stand out here at Northwest Hearing and Tinnitus. Our tinnitus diagnostic assessment includes a comprehensive testing battery designed to better understand your tinnitus and how it impacts your daily life. We always begin with a thorough case history to learn about your symptoms, medical history, noise exposure, and how tinnitus affects your day-to-day activities. We then perform tympanometry, which is a quick pressure test to assess how the eardrums are moving. It can help us identify if there is possible fluid or congestion behind the eardrums. We perform a standard audiogram, which is a comprehensive hearing evaluation that includes both hearing sensitivity and speech understanding testing. We also perform quick SIN testing, which helps us assess how well you understand speech and competing background noise. When clinically necessary, we include distortion product otoacoustic emissions, which evaluate the function of the outer hair cells in the inner ear and can help identify signs of cochlear damage. Additionally, we perform high-frequency audiometry out to 20,000 hertz, whereas many standard hearing evaluations only test out to 8,000 hertz. High-frequency testing can provide additional information about hearing changes that may be associated with tinnitus. As part of the assessment, we may complete tinnitus pitch matching and loudness matching. These tests can help us better characterize your tinnitus and may provide insight into where it is originating within the auditory system. By combining these diagnostic tools, our providers are able to develop a more complete understanding of your tinnitus and create a personalized treatment plan tailored to your needs. It's important to tell your tinnitus care provider how tinnitus impacts your day-to-day life because it helps us tailor a treatment plan that aligns with your personal goals. Understanding how tinnitus affects you also gives your provider meaningful ways to monitor your progress in your tinnitus treatment journey. Every patient experiences tinnitus differently. Listed on the slide are common examples of how patients describe the way tinnitus impacts them. For some people, it's simply noticeable, while for others, it can significantly affect concentration, sleep, mood, and quality of life. By understanding how tinnitus affects your daily activities, emotions, and routines, our providers at Northwest Hearing and Tinnitus can create a more personalized and effective treatment approach. How tinnitus impacts patients is often described in 3 main categories. The first is the auditory or hearing-related impact. These are patients who report statements such as, I can't hear over my tinnitus. In these cases, treatment often focuses on improving auditory input through amplification, such as hearing aids, often paired with sound therapy to reduce the annoyance of tinnitus over time. The second is the emotional or mood-related impact. These patients may describe tinnitus as causing anxiety or irritability or frustration. This patient might say, my tinnitus makes me feel anxious or angry. Treatment in these cases often includes cognitive behavioral therapy or other counseling approaches to help patients develop healthier emotional and behavioral responses to tinnitus. The third is the impact on attention and concentration. These patients may report difficulty focusing, for example, while reading or working from home, because the tinnitus is too distracting. In these cases, treatments may include neuromodulation approaches, such as devices like Lenire, which target attentional components of tinnitus impact. For many patients, tinnitus overlaps across more than one of these categories, so treatment sometimes uses a multi-layered approach, but always tailored to the individual's primary concern. So let's talk about this first category, the auditory impact. There's strong research showing that prescription hearing aids can be an effective way to help manage bothersome tinnitus. When someone has tinnitus and also has hearing loss, treating the hearing loss can reduce how noticeable and bothersome the tinnitus feels. This meta-analysis looked at 27 studies with about 1,400 people to better understand how hearing aids affect tinnitus and if the way the hearing aids are fit really made a difference. Overall, the research found that people who use hearing aids tend to experience a reduction in both how loud their tinnitus feels and how much it bothers them from day to day. So what does this mean? Hearing aids don't usually remove tinnitus completely, but it can often make it less intrusive and easier to ignore. An important part of this finding is that results were better when hearing aids were properly programmed and verified for the person's hearing loss, which means when the hearing aids are carefully fit by a provider to match a patient's hearing needs, patients tend to get better relief from tinnitus compared to devices that are not as precisely adjusted. These improvements were not just short term. The benefits were seen over time. For many people, the improvement continues as they wear the devices consistently. Overall, this supports that hearing aids are a successful treatment method for patients with tinnitus, especially when the devices are properly fit and verified. For patients who report that tinnitus causes emotional distress, such as forming strong feelings of anxiety or anger, cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, can be an effective way to manage your emotional responses you may have towards tinnitus. CBT does not try to change the tinnitus sound itself. Instead, it helps change how the brain and body respond to it. Even though the sound may still be present, it becomes easier to live with and pay less attention to. Research shows strong evidence to support that CBT can reduce tinnitus-related distress. Patients often report that after CBT treatment, tinnitus feels less overwhelming, less frustrating, and less controlling in daily life. So this can improve overall quality of life, including reducing anxiety and depressive symptoms that can be associated with tinnitus. CBT has also been shown to reduce overall tinnitus severity, meaning the perceived impact becomes smaller over time. However, it's important to understand that CBT does not usually reduce the loudness of tinnitus itself. The sound usually stays the same, but the emotional reaction to it changes, which in some cases can make the biggest difference. Cognitive behavioral therapy has been shown to have moderate to large treatment effects and can be effective in both traditional in-person therapy and internet-based programs, making it more accessible for patients. Here at Northwest Hearing and Tinnitus, we offer OTO, which is a CBT program that takes you through modules on a smartphone or tablet. You would complete about 10 to 15 minutes a day of modules to help manage that emotional impact of tinnitus. The third main category that tinnitus may impact is the patient's attention or concentration. When patients report that tinnitus significantly impacts their ability to focus or affects their attention, Lenire may be recommended as part of your treatment plan. So this is a device that is typically used for an hour a day, every day, for a treatment period ranging from anywhere from 12 weeks up to 12 months, depending on the individual's progress and response. Lenire is an FDA-approved, non-surgical, bimodal, neuromodulation device designed to help treat tinnitus by retraining how the brain responds to sound with the goal of reducing the brain's sensitivity to tinnitus. To explain how this works, I often use this analogy with my patients. So let's say you walk into the kitchen and someone is baking chocolate chip cookies. What's the first thing you notice? Smell, right? Your brain naturally pays a lot of attention to that smell when you first walk in. But if you stay in the kitchen for a while, do you keep noticing it the same way? Usually not. So the smell is still there, but your brain starts to label it as less important and stops focusing on it so much. The brain learns to filter it out, so it is no longer at the center of your attention. So this is similar to how Lenire works. Right now, many of you may be very consciously aware of your tinnitus throughout the day. With consistent daily use, Lenire is designed to help retrain the brain so that tinnitus becomes less attention-grabbing over time. Tinnitus may not disappear completely, but it becomes less noticeable and less disruptive in daily life. Just like the smell of chocolate chip cookies is still in the kitchen, the sound is still present, but your brain is no longer treating it as something that demands your attention. So how do we track progress with Lenire? When you're fit with Lenire at Northwest Hearing Tinnitus, we track your progress in several ways. We use standardized questionnaires such as the THI and TFI that you complete at different points throughout your treatment. This gives us objective data to measure how your tinnitus is changing over time. We schedule regular check-ins every 6 to 8 weeks, either by phone or in person. During these visits, we review your progress, provide counseling, and adjust goals as needed. We also focus on real-life changes patients are experiencing. We want to see that the treatment we provided is making a difference in your daily life. We're not just looking at test scores, we're focused on how your daily life is actually improving. Your provider is with you every step of the way throughout your Lenire journey. When you're fit with Lenire at Northwest Hearing Tinnitus, it comes with 1 year of follow-up services, and it comes with a 3-year repair warranty on the device. So this objective data that I've collected has helped me to track my personal clinical success with Lenire. For these numbers that you see on the screen, I've included patients who, 1, were good candidates for Lenire, 2, completed their treatment as I recommended, 3, consistently followed up with me and filled out my THI questionnaire so that I could document their progress. THI questionnaires give a number on a scale from 0 to 100. 0 being that tinnitus doesn't bother them at all, and 100 being that it severely bothered them. My patient's average starting THI score was a 51 prior to treatment, indicating that on average, patients found that their tinnitus was moderately hindering their daily life. Average ending THI score after treatment was a 21, indicating that patients perceive their tinnitus as only slightly impacting them. Just for context, it only takes 7 to 11 points to mean a clinically significant change in THI score. On average, my patient's THI score dropped 30 points, very consistent with Lenire's research of an average of 27.8 point decrease. On average, that means that my patients experienced a 58% reduction in THI scores. However, I do recognize the limitations of my research due to the smaller sample size compared to the hundreds and thousands of people that were tested in Lenire studies. We strongly recommend scheduling a tinnitus evaluation so we can better understand your symptoms and develop a treatment plan that is tailored specifically to you. Next, I'd like to share some additional resources that can help manage tinnitus. This is Dr. Jennifer Gans's 8-week course on mindfulness-based tinnitus stress reduction. It uses strategies such as breathwork, yoga, relaxation, and meditation techniques to help change your relationship with tinnitus. And there's research supporting the effectiveness of mindfulness-based approaches in reducing the emotional distress caused by tinnitus, which can help lower stress and anxiety. This can improve overall quality of life, even if the loudness of the tinnitus remains the same. Other helpful resources are apps that you can download and start using today. So on this slide, you'll see that the green apps are sound therapy apps. These can be used with headphones and can help reduce the perception of tinnitus by providing background sound and masking support. The red apps are meditation-based apps. These focus on relaxation, stress reduction, and mindfulness techniques that can help reduce the emotional impact of tinnitus. Odo is that CBT program that I mentioned earlier. However, it requires a code that must be prescribed by your provider. When you're fit with Lenire here at Northwest, we include the Odo program in your treatment plan to help address both the attentional and emotional impacts of tinnitus. Thank you so much for listening. These are the sources for my portion of the presentation. Call one of the numbers below or contact us on our website to get scheduled for your tinnitus evaluation. So for now, I will be passing things to Dr. O'Neill to give us some more information about Lenire.
Thank you, Dr. Ray. Um, I like your analogy about the freshly baked cookies, but I find that my mind, if I walk into a kitchen full of that smells like freshly baked cookies, I can't stop thinking about them until I've eaten them all. But hello, everyone. Good to meet everybody. I'm going to share my screen here. So my name is Ross O'Neill. I am the founder and CEO of Neuromod. We have developed the bimodal neuromodulation device. It's called Lenire. So a little bit of background on myself. I'm a biomedical engineer by trade. I was doing a PhD in bimodal neuromodulation, was actually planning to work on phantom limb syndrome. And around about that time, my eldest daughter was diagnosed with profound deafness. So I became more interested in active implant devices for hearing, like cochlear implants and things like that. But as I talked to ENTs and audiologists in, that kind of personal journey and asked them about the unmet needs that existed in hearing healthcare, everybody said that tinnitus was the single biggest unmet need in hearing healthcare. And then when I spoke to, I suppose, friends and family and people in my network about tinnitus, I was shocked at how many people had the condition that I didn't know about and how adversely it was affecting their lives, through lack of sleep and not being able to concentrate, missing work, etc. So I decided that we'd try develop this technology, this bimodal neuromodulation technology for it. But as I, talk to people about it, I realized that how absolutely pervasive the condition is, and that it actually affects 15% of the adult population. Now, 6% of the adult population have moderate, severe, or catastrophic. The reason that we focus on them as a company is because they tend to be the majority of treatment seekers, and they are the most impacted patients. So these are the patients who are really losing a lot of sleep, are missing work, and are really being held back in their lives because of the condition. Now, when I looked at the condition and I spoke to patients, every patient almost had the same story. It always started with that they would hear a sound, and that they'd ask a partner, "Do you hear that sound?" And the partner would say to them, "No." And then they kind of got frightened that they could hear this sound in their head that nobody else could hear. And actually, when you look at the neurology of tinnitus, it actually follows that pattern. What happens usually is that you have either a measurable or very early onset of hearing loss. And what happens is the brain tries to compensate for that hearing loss by turning up the volume or the gain. Now, what it does is it ends up turning the volume up so much that the homeostatic behavior in the neurons, this is how the neurons kind of fire and keep themselves alive, it gets amplified up to kind of perceptual levels so that it actually gets perceived as sound. What happens then is that when the patient becomes aware of it, they have a fight or flight response, a kind of a limbic system response that kind of frightens them and makes them, focuses their attention on the symptom. Now, attention and limbic responses or fear are a are a fantastic combination in one way because they're the reason that we are the top of the food chain and the reason that we have survived and haven't all been eaten by saber-toothed lions. But at the same time, in conditions like tinnitus, it's actually working against us because when we hear this illusory sound and we have that fear response, then that focuses our attention to go looking for it again. And what has actually happened is that our brains have misdiagnosed a benign body sensation and tagged it as a threat, which then, kind of leads your brain to look for it more and watch for the threat more, which is a natural kind of survival instinct. Now, the standards of care historically, how the medical community have tried to treat tinnitus, it usually involved either hearing or sound therapy, and the idea there was that if you amplified environmental sound through hearing aids or played sound therapy, that it would distract the brain from the tinnitus sound and give the patient relief. Now, when I was doing my very initial research as a kind of a young engineer and looking into this, I talked to patients about their hearing aids and how they found them for tinnitus. A lot of patients said, look, they're great, but the big problem for me is when I take them off at night, my tinnitus spikes and I find it difficult to get to sleep. Equally, when I talk to patients about CBT and things like that, they said, look, I like it. It helps me, but it's a lot of hard work. And what I found was a lot of patients seem to drop out of the treatment. And so when I looked at the underlying neurology, nobody had ever seemed to tackle tinnitus on the attentional basis. So we were aware that this kind of bimodal technology could be used for that. Now, bimodal technology, it dates back to Pavlov and his dogs. So when you ring the bell and when Pavlov rang the bell and fed the dogs, he found that, if you pair stimuli, you can drive behavioral changes in animals. And that's true for human beings. And over decades, that approach was refined and became known as paired associative stimulation. And we can actually change how auditory neurons in the brain hear by pairing sounds with a reinforcing signal on the somatic or touch senses. The problem with tinnitus is that your brain is giving way too much attention to one sound, this internally generated sound, and is giving less attention to other sounds. So we developed this technology, and the idea was that we would play all the sounds that weren't a tinnitus sound through headphones, and at the same time play that pattern of sound on the tongue so that essentially you are getting the sound through two separate modalities, through your ears, hearing it through the headphones, and then through touch through this tongue tip device on your tongue. And that we would do that again and again and again, through these 30-minute sessions twice a day for 12, 24, 52 weeks. And that gradually what that would do is force the brain to pay attention to all these other sounds that aren't tinnitus, and gradually over time reduce the amount of attention that the brain gives to the tinnitus sound. The reason that this happens is because perfect correlation between two senses on two separate, senses just doesn't happen. It would be like, I often describe it as, you start to listen to a Michael Jackson tune in your ears and you take a drink of Coca-Cola at the same time. And if the sound and the bubbles on your tongue perfectly correlated, your brain would light up and go, what the hell is that? That just doesn't happen in nature. It never, ever happens that the two signals perfectly correlate like that. So what it does is it subconsciously grabs your attention and drives it towards that. And that's the phenomenon that we are driving and using to kind of dilute the attentional effect that tinnitus has in the brain. So we came up with this device that, as I said, would play tones through Bluetooth headphones. And at the same time, then you would feel the sound on your tongue through what's called an intraoral electrode array that we call a tongue tip. So it's like a little lollipop. And each one of the electrodes that you see on that corresponds to a different frequency tone. So when you hear the tone in your ear, the corresponding electrode activates on your tongue. So you're literally getting that kind of Michael Jackson in the ear and kind of, Coca-Cola bubbles on your tongue, perfectly correlated for 30-minute sessions twice a day for an extended period. So when I talked to tinnitus patients, I also realized that they had been, bombarded with lots of products and supplements and different things that really didn't have any clinical evidence behind them. So we decided that if we were going to really establish this technology as a mainstay in the future standards of care, that we'd have to follow a strategy of credibility, of building credibility of the technology. So we decided very, very early on that we would work with all the top scientists. We'd do the largest clinical trials ever conducted in the space. We'd get them published in the top tier peer-reviewed journals, and we'd go the hard route in terms of FDA approval. And then once we got the product on the market, that we would continue to track real world data to make sure that what we saw in the clinical trials, we also saw in the real world. And that is what we've been doing. The device has been evaluated in multiple large-scale clinical trials with over 700 patients. These have been published in Science and Nature, which are some of the top-tier peer-reviewed journals. It made the cover story in two of those journal papers. So the first two clinical trials were really kind of exploratory trials where we looked at different stimulation parameters to see what drove the biggest effects. And we also looked at different patient subgroups to see were any, particular patients differentially responsive to any individual stimuli. So we did that with two large-scale clinical trials, 326 patients in our first trial, 191 in our second, and they led to the design of our pivotal FDA study, which we designed in collaboration with the FDA, which was a controlled clinical trial that led to the FDA approval of the device. What those studies essentially showed us was that this bimodal neuromodulation approach delivers much bigger results much faster than the other standards of care. So when we went to the FDA, there are two routes that you can bring a new product to the market in the US. One is through 510(k). The products like this are FDA cleared. So they require that there is a predicate device. So there's some earlier device that exists that you can prove that your product is equally technically equivalent to. Essentially, it performs the same in efficacy and safety. Now, if you have a completely novel device, like our technology was, there had never been a bimodal neuromodulation device ever before approved by the FDA. You have to go a different route, which is the de novo pathway. So when you get that, the difference is that you're technically FDA approved, and that means that you have put clinical data in front of the FDA that proves the efficacy and safety of the technology. So when we talk to the FDA, they looked at some of our earlier research studies, and they liked one study design that we had, which was a single-arm repeated measure study. And this is where where patients acted as their own controls. We gave patients sound therapy for 6 weeks, and then we gave them bimodal neuromodulation for the second 6 weeks. What we had seen in the earlier trials that the FDA wanted to see us replicate or wanted to see again was that when we gave patients sound therapy, they had a certain rate of improvement and a certain percentage of the patients responded. Now, when we gave them bimodal in the second 6 weeks, we saw an increased rate of improvement and a much higher percentage of patients responded. So they said, we like this design because it controls for sound therapy, controls for any placebo effects in the first 6 weeks. And then in the second 6 weeks, if you see an increased improvement over and above what you saw already in the first 6 weeks, then we know that the addition of the tongue tip, if you like, is having an additional and synergistic effect. So they tasked us with running a trial, which was right in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So amid rolling lockdowns, we had to run a clinical trial across 3 clinical sites in Europe, Ireland, Belgium, and Germany, and had to recruit over 100 patients. So we were glad to find that when we completed the clinical trial, that we replicated the results from the earlier study and showed that bimodal neuromodulation outperformed sound therapy again. We also showed that the device was very safe. There were 0 adverse device events and 0 adverse serious events. So the FDA gave a very low risk profile to the device. When they took that and the efficacy, because the de novo is essentially a risk to benefit consideration, they agreed that it warranted FDA approval because the benefits that it provides dramatically outweigh the risks. So following that, as we launched the product in the US, we started to track real world data. We tracked it across multiple clinical sites. One of the sites that we tracked was in New York, and we saw actually that the results were slightly better than what we saw in the clinical trials. And we put that down to what we were calling the 3 Ps. So in the clinical trials, you effectively evaluate the product and the product alone. But in the real world, the reason that we believe we're seeing better results is that when you take an effective product like Lenire and you put it in the hands of skilled providers who follow well-defined clinical protocols, then you see that additional benefit that the provider and the protocols bring on top of the efficacy of the product alone. So we were glad to see that the efficacy that we saw in the earlier clinical trials were actually improved on when we worked with these really skillful providers. We saw similar effects in Boston, and that study is currently in peer review. The New York study has just been published. We also tracked data in a clinic in Alaska, which was actually also published. We published our very initial data from them, but they're now at the kind of 2 and 3 year point where they have been able to track the long-term efficacy with their patients. So we were delighted to see that at 12 months and 24 months post-treatment, that the effects that we saw in the initial treatments are sustained. We expanded that long-term efficacy study to 2 other clinics, and we were glad to see that we were seeing similar results across all 3 clinics. So that data is currently being written up and will be submitted for peer review pretty soon. Now, when we compare our real-world data there was a large study conducted in Europe called the Unity study. So this was funded by the hearing aid manufacturers, and what they wanted to see was when you combine all other standards of care, so hearing aids with structured counseling, hearing aids with sound therapy, sound therapy with CBT, etc. They wanted to see what were the most effective combinations of the standards of care. And so what we found was that hearing aids and structured counseling were one of the most effective. But when we compare our real world data, which combine Lenire with structured counseling and also Lenire with structured counseling in patients who are using hearing aids, we see that the performance that we get or the benefits we get outperform those technologies. And now we're starting to collect data right across the United States. We have a large study that has, at this point, over 2,000 patients across multiple clinics across the entire US. And we're seeing that those results are highly consistent across all clinical sites across the entire country. So the ACCESS study will be the largest study ever published in the field of tinnitus. And as I say, right now it's at over 2,000 patients that show that bimodal neuromodulation is, a highly effective treatment for tinnitus. Our next move will be to get bimodal neuromodulation and Lenire into the clinical practice guidelines of the AAO and of the audiology professional groups, so that it becomes a mainstay in the future standards care. So that's all from me, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you both for presenting tonight. It has been an unbelievably interactive experience, and we have lots of great questions coming through. So if you'll give me just a minute, I'm just going to round the last of them up, and then we'll start going for those. So just a moment here while I get things together, and then I'll share my screen. Okay, you should be able to see file that says questions. So the very first question that has come through, what medications cause tinnitus?
I might leave that question to the medical professional here. I'll leave that to Dr. Ray.
So when you come in for your, when you fill out your intake paperwork, there's going to be a section for putting your medications that you're currently using. So we can take a look at your medications, see if there's anything that could be causing tinnitus. Sometimes different chemotherapy medications, cisplatin is a really common one that can cause hearing loss and tinnitus, but that is something that we look at, even before you come and sit in our chair, we look at those lists of medications. So I'd strongly recommend doing that tinnitus evaluation. So that is part of that assessment. So we can look at your medications and be able to assess that. Good question.
Perfect. And then to that point, anything that we have, any questions that we come in that would be more Lenire geared, we're going to direct those towards Dr. O'Neill, and then everything that's about Northwest Hearing Tinnitus or things exactly like this, we'll direct to Dr. Spells. So next question, here we go. I believe that my tinnitus was caused by COVID, or could it just be a coincidence that tinnitus appeared when I got COVID?
That is also a good question. I am not aware of research at the moment of how COVID has impacted tinnitus. In my clinical experience, I have seen that quite often, especially in the height of the pandemic, of patients really experiencing tinnitus after COVID or in some cases COVID vaccines. I'm actually unfamiliar with the research. I don't know if Dr. O'Neill has any insight on that.
Yeah. So we funded a study along with Tinnitus UK, which is the new name for the British Tinnitus Association, and I think it was the University of Manchester, Kevin Monroe, possibly. And what they did was they searched the UK Biobank, which is includes all NHS patient data, and they searched it to see was there an uptick in the incidences of tinnitus during the COVID period over that kind of couple of years, and they didn't find an increase. I think probably what a lot of people probably developed tinnitus at the same time that they were getting contracted COVID or got the COVID vaccines. And it's the old adage that correlation does not denote causation. So I think it was just that people kind of thought, well, I got it around about the same time as I got COVID or my shots. So, but that being said, it's remarkable how many people say it. So, time will tell. We literally looked at it in the heat of the moment, but as that kind of data gets bigger and it gets more retrospective, I think we'll get a clearer answer on that.
Excellent. All right, on to our next question. Is there any known genetic component to tinnitus?
I'm happy to have a go at that. So I think there is a belief that there is. I know that Professor Berthold Languth, who's the head of the Tinnitus Research Initiative, they are actively looking at this. I think there is a kind of a belief that, you know, I mean, if you put every adult in a sound booth, pretty much everybody has tinnitus. Everybody. But there seems to be some kind of fundamental difference between patients for whom have that limbic system response and that then focused attention, and there is a belief that underlying that there may be a genetic component, and certainly if you look at things like when you look at the professions of tinnitus sufferers, they tend to be disproportionately biased towards highly technical, highly focused minds. A lot of engineers, sound engineers, computer scientists, finance people. There are also a lot of musicians and soldiers and stuff, but that's probably a lot to do with occupational exposure. But everything comes down to genetics, basically. What underpins a technical brain is genetics. So I think there's a genetic link to be found. I think there is consensus that there is something there, but and the research is being done. So again, time will tell, but I think that many in the field believe that there is.
Great. The next question kind of gave you a little preview there. This is going to be directed for Dr. O'Neill specifically. This person says, I'm a patient of Northwest Hearing Tinnitus under Dr. Leah Samuel's care, using Oticon Mini Right Intent 1 hearing aids for masking in the Oto app. My question is, how much sharing is there between your research and the tinnitus research by hearing aid developers, behavioral therapies like Oto, and the other professionals in this space?
I would say there's probably a limited amount of shared research between us. I think that what we are seeing is, and I've definitely seen some very interesting data, that a lot of tinnitus providers across the United States now are bundling Lenire with Oto, and there has been real world data gathered on patients that are using that combination, and the results are very good, I have to say, are very good. Also, we have gathered a lot of data. We did an actual real world study with our provider in Alaska, where we looked at patients that had used Lenire with and without hearing aids. And we saw that the results with hearing aids were slightly better. So when they had both, I think the percentage responders was actually above 90%. And the results were slightly better. And that was actually the slide I showed where I overlaid our real world data against the Unity study. One of those lines was those patients. I think there was 100 and something patients that had used both Lenire with hearing aids and were very good. So in terms of the research, we don't have any active research programs together. Well, we certainly don't have any with Oto or with the hearing aid manufacturers, but I think we're all collecting real world data together and taking a look at that and publishing that.
Excellent. All right, on to the next set here. All right. There's a note here. It just says, before this client forgets, Ben Thompson recently talked about new research suggesting a direct link between hearing loss and mental decline, dementia, and other similar issues. Recommends support for any hearing loss. So with that sentiment, do you agree with this statement as well?
Yeah, so there was a large study, was again, I think it was funded by I think it's Dr. Frank Lin, the Achieve study, I think it was called. It was a very large scale study, and they looked at cognitive decline and dementia, and I think there were links between hearing loss and and dementia. Now, I think that was probably over egged, if you like. I think everybody jumped on it and went, "Oh my God, if you treat hearing loss, you're basically you're curing dementia." It was, as far as I can remember now, and it's a while since I read the data, but I think it was, one contributory factor along with, all the others, you know, alcohol, poor diet, lifestyle, smoking, etc., etc. I think it had maybe a 7% contribution overall to, but there definitely, and I know also there was a large longevity study in Ireland, which tracked people over, I think it was 50 years, and they also found that correlation as well. So I think I've always maintained that sensory health is cognitive health, and cognitive health is essential for healthy aging. And I would be a big proponent of, as soon as you start to develop tinnitus or hearing loss, that you need to get into the care of an audiologist, because tinnitus especially is probably the tip of the spear in terms of leading biomarkers that tells you that your lifelong hearing loss journey has started, and it progresses from tinnitus through to hearing loss, and then if that's not properly managed, then it can lead to cognitive decline and dementia in later life. Now, it's probably those links are probably more practical than people think. So rather than it being, some kind of, deep genetic thing, it's literally a use it or lose it kind of phenomenon. And it's basically, if you can't hear in conversations, you withdraw, you miss things, your brain is not getting the food that it needs to sustain it, and therefore it just starts to atrophy. So it's literally, the brain is like a muscle. It needs to be worked like every other muscle. And the way it gets worked is to feed it sensory information. And I would say to people, whenever you start to develop hearing loss, invest now in your sensory health, in your long-term cognitive health, because your 85-year-old self will thank your 65-year-old self for that investment. Because the one thing we can't get back is time. And I think you can't, if your brain is like basically underfed over that kind of 20, 30 years, then you can't do anything about it. Whereas if in kind of midlife to kind of, let's say, retirement, if you make that investment and invest in your brain health, then you are really giving yourself the best chance at keeping cognitively sharp in later life. I just recently watched on the BBC David Attenborough celebrating his 100th birthday, and the guy is so sharp, it's incredible. And I know he wears hearing aids and he keeps a very active mind. So yeah, definitely sensory health is brain health, and brain health is healthy aging health, if you like. So yeah, so that link is there.
One thing I wanted to add too, if that was okay, from a clinical standpoint, when when I am doing your hearing diagnostic, not only am I doing the beep test where, you hear the beeps and raise your hand, I'm doing a lot of speech understanding. So what makes you a hearing aid candidate is when it starts to impact your speech understanding. Are you hearing all those important consonants of speech? And if that's not happening, if my test is showing that you're not hearing all those important speech sounds, that tells me that your brain is having to work a lot harder to fill in the blanks. And, you could be getting by, but yeah, your brain's working harder. And, as Dr. O'Neill said, doing that for 10, 20 years, that puts a lot of strain on the brain. So yeah, part of that evaluation, we assess if there's hearing loss for one, and is it enough, to proceed with hearing aids.
Yes.
Excellent.
Similarly with tinnitus, it's a similar effect. Basically, if your brain is giving all its attention and concentration to this illusory sound, you're giving less attention to the conversations around you, and so tinnitus is as bad for that long-term brain health as hearing loss. So, and there are studies to show that it affects scores across all kind of cognitive tests. So if you have tinnitus, you perform less well on those cognitive tests as people who don't have tinnitus. So if you have tinnitus or hearing loss, get it treated, invest now in your future brain health.
Perfect. Makes sense. All right. Let's see. It says, do you hear the sound of your breathing now that you've read this? The goal is to put your ringing in the same box as your breathing as it was explained to me. Is that something you would also agree with?
Yeah, I think it's like that. As I said, tinnitus is a benign body sensation. But your brain has misdiagnosed it as a threat, and that's the limbic system engagement. And then fear drives attention, and but equally, the joke that I always make is, if you're in a room and the fire alarm goes off, everybody will look at the fire alarm and go, "Oh my God, like it's so loud." And then when everyone would look to the door to say, "Okay, we better get out of here," if there was a saber-toothed lion in the door, nobody would hear the fire alarm anymore, So everyone would be trying to figure out who's the slowest person in the room so they could outrun him essentially. But it's like hearing or loudness is a function of attention. And so the goal is to dilute the attention that the brain gives to tinnitus and to just, dilute it and get it listening to other sounds. And that was the basis of our technology. And so that it becomes a kind of a background benign thing, and we hear from the successful patients that we have is that they often say, or the most recent kind of quote I heard was that a patient said it used to be like a jet engine outside my window. Now it's like a bus somewhere passing in the background. I don't really hear it. I can hear it if I listen out for it. But so yeah, it's very like you're breathing. It becomes an unconscious kind of background benign body phenomenon as opposed to something that's really there at the front of your attention and consciousness.
All right. Are any of the participants able to download copies of the questionnaire, specifically the THI and TFI?
Yeah, they're freely available on the internet, both of those questionnaires. What I would caution though is that I think patients sampling, it's a bit like blood pressure. The more you take, the more you sample and measure your own blood pressure, the more your blood pressure will go up. The one thing that will guarantee having high blood pressure is measuring your blood pressure repeatedly. So tinnitus is a bit like that. So again, it's about trying to give it less attention and not more. So yeah, you can download the copies of the questionnaires, but I wouldn't recommend
Yeah, I would
sampling.
absolutely agree with that. The reason why I was talking about these things, I wanted to present, how your provider is, measuring your treatment. I do not want you going to download the THI and TFI and, you fill it out every day to assess your tinnitus. If you are constantly checking in on your tinnitus on a daily, filling out a THI every week, you're training your brain to bring more attention and awareness to your tinnitus, which can cause those fluctuations. So I don't recommend filling out a THI regularly. These are tools for me to be, and if you become interested in your scores, we can talk about that, but don't fill that out in your own. These are tools for your provider to work with you.
Yeah. And I can tell you that the Tinnitus Research Initiative launched an app called Track My Tinnitus, and it was a disaster. I think it basically just caused people to think way too much about their tinnitus and make it worse. So so I completely agree. I think these are clinical tools and best just left in the hands of qualified clinicians.
Excellent. I'm glad that whoever was asked about this so we can get some clarity on it. I'm glad that was a question. All right. Let's see, number 8. Can a primary care or ENT prescribe the Oto series and code?
So that'll just be audiologists. As far as I'm aware, unless Dr. O'Neill, you have some other perspective. So it's going to be doctors of audiology, most likely ones that have, that do tinnitus care.
Okay, perfect. I appreciate the desire to reduce the emotional and mental impacts of tinnitus. Is there any progress in actually reducing or eliminating it?
So I think eliminating it. I know that the Tinnitus Research Initiative and a lot of like people, and we're very careful about the word cure. I think is like nobody likes using that word anymore because it's again tinnitus is a benign body sensation. So and someone drew the analogy with breathing. I mean, you don't want to eliminate your breathing, right? It's going to be there. The hearing loss is going to be there. It's really about ignoring it. Now, what I will say is that Professor Dirk de Ridder, who's also involved with the Tinnitus Research Initiative, gave a fantastic talk at the TRI meeting in Vancouver about 2 years ago, and his view was, look, tinnitus is probably most likely going to be like HIV. It was a combination of treatments together that really made the management of that effective. And the underlying neurology of tinnitus, when you consider that makes sense, right? It has an auditory component, has an attentional component, and has a limbic or emotional component. So I think that you need to kind of attack all three nodes together. So my prediction is ultimately that's where the tinnitus treatment market, if you like, will go. And that will reduce it to such a level that you just won't be aware of it anymore. But completely eliminating it or the word cure, I think is not helpful. It's about it's about making it reclassifying it back to the benign body sensation that it actually is.
Gotcha. All right. Next question on deck. Is this, specifically Lenire, compatible with my hearing aids fitted from Northwest Hearing Tinnitus? I'm concerned as if I still experience outside noise interference when outside or in a crowded place that makes it unpleasant for me and difficult for the caller on the other end of the line in a phone call.
So, when you're using Lenire, the headphones are fit for your hearing loss without hearing aids. So you actually won't be using your hearing aids when you are using the Lenire. I do have patients that have hearing aids and are treating tinnitus with Lenire, but yeah, they would be separate. You'd be wearing your hearing aids all waking hours. You'd be using the tinnitus sound therapy if that's in your hearing aids. And then you'd be using the Lenire for twice a day for 30 minutes or once a day for an hour, but those are not used at the same time. You take your hearing aids out, use the Lenire. So there's no compatibility that needs to happen with that.
Okay. This is probably more for Dr. Spells. Is Lenire, is it covered by insurance? Looks like we called the insurance carrier, and they said it was subject to pre-certification.
So when you come in for your tinnitus evaluation, before you even sit in my chair, a day or two before, I have an awesome billing team that runs your insurance to see what kind of coverage you have. I will say a lot of insurances are not covering Lenire at this time. But that is part of that. When you come in for your assessment, you'll get quotes, you'll get information if that's covered, and what out-of-pocket costs would be.
Excellent. Okay. Someone wants to know this, I believe is for Dr. O'Neill. Are there any new trials they can sign up or participate in?
We're not running any trials currently, no.
Okay. All right, let's see. Does Lenire work in conjunction with hearing aids?
Yeah, so we tracked real world data patients so hearing aid patients that also used Lenire, and as I said, they actually got on slightly better than patients that used hearing or used Lenire alone. So we had over 90%. I think that data is currently in peer review as well. So we'll be publishing that. Actually, I'm wrong. It's not in peer review. I think it was already published on Audiology Online. So yeah, so it does work in conjunction with hearing aids, which makes sense. I mean, as I said, There's three components to the underlying neurology of tinnitus, which is the auditory component, the hearing loss component, which is really giving rise to the condition. But then the next part is the attention that your brain is giving it, and then the final component is the emotional response, and they keep feeding each other. So I think the perfect solution would be all three, would be hearing aids, Lenire and Oto, or some CBT app. Now that is obviously, it's very expensive, but and sometimes, one is more a bigger problem than the other, and that's up to your audiologist to figure that out. But ultimately, I predict that that's where it will go, is that you'll get all three together, in some kind of combination. So, and look, who knows what the future brings, but we wanted to bring a new technology that addressed the attentional component of it, because it hadn't been tackled before, and the every audiologist I talk to, they're not telling me they want less treatments for tinnitus. They want more options, right? So yeah, I think the future is very bright for tinnitus treatment, and I'm excited about it, and we'll continue to work and develop our part of that kind of troika of treatment approaches, if you like, and I suspect the others will too.
And that's part of the presentation I talked about, is why it's so important for you to tell your tinnitus provider how tinnitus impacts you, because you won't necessarily be fit with all three of those treatments. So telling your tinnitus provider, how tinnitus impacts you is really going to help them know how to treat tinnitus. Because I say, when you've seen one tinnitus patient, you've seen one tinnitus patient, because the way tinnitus impacts from one person to the other is just so different. So that's that piece too. So your provider is going to be the one that's going to create that treatment plan for you.
Perfect. Now, the questions, we have a handful left, if we can borrow your time for maybe another, 5 to 10 minutes. They were coming in as we were starting the question, so I'm just going to go ahead and say them. So Priscilla, she says, I have hyperacusis in addition to tinnitus. Usually the tinnitus is not too intrusive. The hyperacusis bothers me so much that the tinnitus takes backstage, but lately it's been worse. It's not only louder and more variable, but it seems to get worse the longer I'm in auditory situations, and is interfering more with my hearing despite my hearing aids. Is Lenire likely to set up hyperacusis? That is, does it use louder or high-pitched sounds in the treatment?
Yeah, so we in our first study, the TENTE-1 trial, that was a parameter optimization and patient subtyping study. So what we did was we took different, kind of timing delays between the stimuli and different approaches like that. And so we compared these different stimulus approaches. And then in addition to that, we stratified the patients into different subgroups, one of which was hyperacusis. So these were patients that had both tinnitus and hyperacusis. And those patients actually did disproportionately well. And at the time, I remember we were calling them super responders. And we actually speculated, had we maybe developed a treatment for a very specific type of tinnitus, like hyperacusive tinnitus, if you like. And so, yeah, those patients did really, really well. Now, we looked for it in the second clinical trial as well. We saw a trend towards it. It didn't make statistical significance, but the sample size was smaller. It was 191 patients as opposed to the 3 that were in the first clinical trial. But yeah, so those patients seemed to do very well at the start. Now, we didn't, in the end, we decided to not go with that kind of personalized treatment for different patient subtypes. Because we saw that the synchronized approach was, pretty much the most effective for everybody. So we just decided that we'd go to market with that one.
Okay, Next question. Actually, the next two are about Lenire specifically. So this question, does the device reverse a major or certain percentage of one's tinnitus condition? Does it help to better manage tinnitus in your daily life? And how often does this device need to be upgraded? Were lifestyle changes incorporated as a variable?
Okay, a lot of questions in that question.
Yeah. First,
I'll
so
try to
the
keep
first
track.
one, does the device reverse a major or certain percentage of one's tinnitus condition?
So the way we measure it is in this tinnitus handicap inventory or the tinnitus functional index. They're the most commonly used clinical outcome measures in all tinnitus clinical trials. And what they do is they capture I guess the quality of life impact points that tinnitus has, like sleep, emotional disturbance, concentration, things like that. And then it does them in a kind of relatively sophisticated way that kind of asks in double negatives to account for biases and stuff like that. And it tracks them across, not a daily kind of sampling rate as we said earlier, but like over a kind of 6, 8, 12 weeks is supposed to be done at a sampling rate of months. And what we see is improvement in those scores. So what you want to see is 7 points improvement is technically clinically significant. Now, if you want a life-changing improvement, it's anything over 20 points. So 20 points moves you from a category. It moves you from catastrophic to severe, or severe to moderate, or moderate to mild. So it's the difference between maybe not sleeping and sleeping, or really just being totally intruded with the condition, or being able to live with it. So a 20-point improvement is life-changing. I think we've seen that both from the data from Northwest. We see it across all the data from all the sites that we've been tracking, that the average improvements are way above kind of 20 points to tend to be around the kind of 30 plus point mark. And that the percentage of improvers tends to be, it's definitely over 70% in all clinics, but it's usually somewhere between 80 and 90% in the majority of clinics. So yeah, I would say that it delivers a fairly major improvement by evidenced by the fact that most patients move down at least one category in severity.
Kind of piggybacking on that, you've answered the first part of the second question, but how often does this device need to be upgraded?
Upgraded. So you get the device. It lasts you for the duration of your treatment, but maybe the question means reconfigured. I would hand that over to Dr. Ray to answer that question.
Yeah. So typically, when we are treating tinnitus or hearing loss, we want to test your hearing every year or two to monitor for changes. The device wouldn't necessarily need to be upgraded, but if you had a change in your hearing, we want to recalibrate the headphones to be appropriate.
Okay. The last question they had with this, were there lifestyle changes that were incorporated as a variable, particularly when you were doing the different research and clinical trials?
No, well, not in the clinical trials. We weren't telling people to, give up salt or give up alcohol, like as if anybody would follow that advice anyway. But but the point is that I suppose you take a large enough sample that some people in the middle of that clinical trial will go on a health kick and cut out salt and alcohol out of their diet. But for every one of them, there'll probably be even more people who take more salt on their food, and or drink more caffeine or more alcohol. So the what you try to do is you take as big a sample as you can, so they kind of counteract each other. So we didn't control for any lifestyle changes. We certainly didn't tell patients to undergo any lifestyle changes. What you're trying to do when you do clinical trials is evaluate the product and the product alone. We didn't allow any kind of provider kind of structure counseling or anything like that. Which is why then when we released the product into the wild, if you like, of clinical practice, and we tracked the real world data, we were delighted to see, because actually most medical technologies, whether it's pharmaceuticals, devices, or whatever, when you release them into the real world, the data, clinical outcomes usually gets a little bit worse, because because maybe people prescribe off label or whatever, or patients aren't as compliant. But when we were quite particular about who we worked with, so we handpicked providers. We tried to find the best tinnitus providers in the country, work with them, and it's this three-piece formula, because we know if you work with the top providers, they will have very well-defined clinical processes around tinnitus and have a lot of experience, and that's really what adds the even additional benefits that we're seeing in the real-world data, and why it's so important. Tinnitus has to be managed in the hands of expert audiologists and/or ENTs. It just has to be. It always will. It will never be a Costco kind of managed condition. I don't believe it. I think it always has to be in the hands of medical experts.
Perfect. Now we continue to have more questions come in. So in complete transparency, so that we're not running this to be, 2 hours long. Anyone's questions that I've not asked, I will ask behind the scenes, and then I can email those responses to you. So I don't want you to think that you're not heard, but to keep us from staying on until midnight with lots of great questions. We're going to do just 2 or 3 more, and then we'll wrap it up for this evening. So next one I have, this is actually for both of you. Rick B asks, after a Lenire program has ended, is there evidence of tinnitus returning to prior levels?
So I can tell you what we're seeing from the large scale data, and then maybe Dr. Ray can speak from her individual clinical experience. So what we have seen is that patients fall into one of 3 categories. There's kind of what I give everything names. It's one of my many faults, but I call, there's the first group I call one and done. So they use the device for some amount of time, and it's not necessarily for the 12 weeks. I think everybody focuses on this 12 weeks, and the reason that we kind of the 12-week number even came into existence is because that's kind of a neuroscience window. If you want to learn any new trick or trait or whatever, like if you wanted to learn juggling from a standing start right now, it will take you 90 days to do that. And that's kind of 12 weeks. So that's how long it takes for new neuronal connections to form in the brain and become hardwired. But for a lot of patients, it's not 12 weeks. It might be, 24, 48 or more weeks that they do a treatment. But that being said, the groups we see are the one and done patients. So they're patients that undergo treatment where we know it's less than 6 months, because the tongue tip expires after 6 months. So they don't buy a second tongue tip. There's another group that we call the top ups. So they are patients that they get to a good place maybe after treatment. They take a break maybe for 6 months or a year, and then I don't know, maybe some stressful event or something happens, and their tinnitus flares up again, and then they purchase a second tongue tip. So they're topping up. And then the third group I call the continuals. So these are patients that every 6 months, when their tongue tip expires, they buy another one. So that's what we're seeing. I would say it's about heading for between 2/3 or 1/3 and 40% of patients are repurchasing tongue tips.
That's pretty closely to what I have been seeing clinically. There are those patients that, we're seeing that plateau. They're like, I'm feeling ready to wean off the device, and then they put it in the drawer and they don't need it again. I do have some patients that get to that point and then maybe have a super stressful thing that happened in their life. They're going through a messy divorce, or I had one patient, death of a child, and that amount of stress in your life caused, that tinnitus to really, fluctuate. And so we're like, all right, let's take the Lenire back out. Let's, go back to using it routinely and kind of use it as, start using it consistently again. I have some patients that, they go, Dr. Spells, I think it's so relaxing. I feel like it puts me to sleep every night. Please don't fall asleep with the tongue tip in your mouth. But they're like, it's so relaxing every night. I just want to keep using it before bed because it helps relax me. And we're like, well, oh, yeah, absolutely. Continue using it if you're still finding that value in it. But yeah, essentially what Dr. O'Neill said is about what I experienced as well.
Okay, very last question that we're going to ask this evening, and it comes from Lisa. First off, she says, thanks for all that you're doing to help us. So really want to start off with that gratitude. And her question is, does Lenire help tinnitus if it's most likely caused by cervical arthritis and TMJ?
I might leave that question for the medical expert here.
I haven't had a lot of experience with patients with TMJ. I do have one patient right now who is using the Lenire, but has a history of TMJ. He's still pretty new in his treatment, but I haven't had a huge sample size for both of those conditions to give you, accurate feedback on that. That is a really good question, though. I was hoping Dr. O'Neill maybe had some more
Yeah,
insight on that.
Unfortunately, I don't think we have data on it. Yeah, because it is something that pops up. I think when you go from, treating, hundreds of patients in clinical trials to at this point we're into tens of thousands of patients in the real world, you start to come across things like this. And now, as we move from tens of thousands into hundreds of thousands of patients, we'll get bigger sample sizes. But we start with this is the kind of the journey as we as more patients use this, we start to hit these kind of unusual cases. But I don't have any data to cast any light on that, unfortunately.
But from a clinical perspective too, if I'm identifying that it could be TMJ related and you've never seen a specialist for that, we're going to, make sure you're referred to the right specialist and make sure we do everything on that end before we do something like Lenire. The only reason why I, did Lenire for that patient with TMJ is because they did all the recommended treatment and really haven't experienced much difference. So then we proceeded with Lenire. So if there is another underlying health issue, we absolutely want to get that addressed first before we would do something like Lenire.
Perfect. Well, everyone, that is going to wrap up this evening's presentation. We want to thank you again for spending time with us. We know your day is so busy, but to take time out and learn about Lenire, really appreciate your time. And we also want to thank the presenters for their expertise, willingness to educate us about things, especially very important things. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to share the screen with contact information. So as you're trickling out and leaving, you've got it just at your fingertips. And like I said, again, I'm going to email that to you with information about Lenire and about Northwest Hearing and Tinnitus. So if we have questions or we want to move forward with Lenire, you have the information that you need. So thanks for joining us this evening, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for being here.